Undercover Boss. How many of you have seen Undercover Boss? Okay. Undercover Boss. They take a CEO of a company, somebody that either owns the company or heads up the company. They put them in entry-level jobs in their company where they have to learn the ropes and act as if they're just some person off the street that's just starting a new job. And they get to see their company from the inside out. And they get to hear and talk to their employees. And the employees have no idea that they're talking to the owner of the company that probably makes millions of dollars every year and now trying to do these entry-level tasks. One of the most popular, I just looked up what's the most popular. One of the most popular ones was DirecTV. And I don't know if you saw this one. DirecTV CEO went to work installing DirecTVs at houses. Then he was in the call center dealing with DirecTVs. And then he was in the warehouse working on all of that. And they didn't recognize him, right? They treat him just like a regular employee. But little did they know, he had the power to make significant changes. I mean, he could fire them. He could give them raises. He could raise them up. But he also had the power to fix things. You know, a lot of times you're at work and you're thinking, man, we need to do this, this, and this. If only we could do this. If only I could get someone that, well, these people got the CEO's attention as they went through this. And he was able to bring significant good consequences and bad consequences for their work. And they had no idea they were dealing with the CEO. Sometimes we do not recognize with whom we are. In other words, we're with someone. We may not know that they're somebody famous. I skied in Telluride this weekend. I'm sure I skied next to somebody famous, and they had their goggles on, and I had no idea who they were. They probably didn't know they were skiing next to me either.
No idea.
But either we don't know what they look like, certain person, and so we don't recognize them, or we recognize them, but we don't have any idea or don't understand their skill set or what they bring to the table. And I think one of the biggest problems we have in the world, and that's with everyone across the board, is not recognizing who Jesus is. People either are unaware, they don't have the knowledge, they've not been exposed to Christ and the knowledge of Jesus, or they don't fully comprehend it or believe who he is, and they don't recognize his position as the Son of God. Or some people may have been exposed to that and understand that, and they have forgotten who Jesus is. They've forgotten his power. They've forgotten what skills he has, the ability that Christ has. And we're going to look today at a gentleman who actually got it. He did recognize who Jesus was. And our text today is Mark 10, 46 through 52. The question we're going to kind of contemplate as we read this is, who is Jesus? Who is Jesus? And as we look at this kind of famous passage on blind Bartimaeus, how would you like that if that was your, like everyone always said, hey, you know Bartimaeus? Oh, you mean blind Bartimaeus? Like everybody says blind Bartimaeus. Blind Bartimaeus, we're going to look at him. He recognizes. He makes a request. There's restoration. So recognize, request, and restore. Stand with me as we read Mark 10, verses 46 through 52. And they came to Jericho. And as he was leaving Jericho with his disciples and a great crowd, Bartimaeus, a blind beggar, the son of Timaeus, was sitting by the roadside. And when he heard that it was Jesus of Nazareth, he began to cry out and say, Jesus, Son of God, have mercy on me. And many rebuked him, telling him to be quiet, be silent. But he cried out all the more, Son of David, have mercy on me. Jesus stopped and said, call him. They called the blind man, saying, hey, take heart, get up, he's calling you. And throwing off his cloak, he sprang up and came to Jesus. And Jesus said to him, what do you want me to do for you? The blind man said to him, "Rabbi, let me recover my sight." And Jesus said to him, "Go your way, your faith has made you well." And immediately he recovered his sight and followed him on the way. The word of the Lord. Thanks be to God. So the first thing I mentioned was recognize. And I said that a lot of us don't recognize who Jesus is. This guy did. So Jesus, remember what's going on. Jesus is on the way from Galilee. He's heading down south, and he's going into Jerusalem. And at this point, he's actually heading up in elevation, but he's heading south. And Jericho is just north, a little north and east of Jerusalem. Now, you may say, wait a minute, I thought Joshua fought the Battle of Jericho and it's toast. Well, it was. Jericho was destroyed in the conquest when Joshua and the Israelites came in from Egypt. I believe it was about 1450, around there. And he destroyed, that God dropped the wall. The wall was destroyed and it was impacted. And actually there is evidence of that. And this is not what the sermon's about, but if you look up, there is archaeological evidence that shows there was a massive cataclysmic thing happening to the city, that the city imploded and the walls fell in, but people are divided as far as carbon dating and different dating on the date. Some say it's as late as 1550, some say it's 1450, but we know, if it's in line with God's word, and it is, that it occurred about 1450, I believe, when Moses and all of them left. Then Joshua took them in the promised land and Jericho was destroyed. The city was rebuilt, but with all the rubble, they didn't build it on the same site. They built it just a few miles, like a mile, I think, south of there. So he comes through, and he's in Old Jericho, and they pass through Old Jericho, and they're leaving Old Jericho, and they're about to come into New Jericho. And they see this man, blind Bartimaeus. And Bartimaeus recognizes who Jesus is. Now, bar, does anyone know what bar means? Not a bar, but bar in Hebrew? Son of. So Bartimaeus, it means son of Timaeus. And then what does he say? He was the son of Timaeus. That's the Department of Redundancy, right? But he's saying the same thing. Bartimaeus is just saying he's the son of Timaeus. Now, most commentators make note of this, and they say the reason that Mark wrote this, son of Timaeus, is that he probably became a prominent figure in the church. When he followed Jesus here, they posit that he followed Jesus. He followed him into the triumphal entry as well, and then he saw the whole Passion Week, saw Christ crucified, and when he resurrected, was probably part of that early church that followed Jesus. But he's mentioned here by name, and that's significant because Mark usually doesn't do that. He doesn't talk about the people who he healed by name. He may even say Jairus, but he'd say Jairus' relative is the one that was healed. And he mentions Bartimaeus by name here. We think that this may be because he became very famous or prominent in the church later on. But Bartimaeus recognizes who Jesus is. Now, not just that it's Jesus. Somebody he probably asked somebody, what's going on? He can't see, obviously. He's sitting there on the side of the road. What's going on? And they said, oh, it's Jesus of Nazareth. Jesus was actually a common name back in the day. It is now also in certain cultures. But it was very popular. And so when they said Jesus of Nazareth, he knew this is the guy that I've heard of. This is the man I never heard of. Now, we know that he's heard of Jesus. If you go back to the recess of your mind, January, I preached on Mark 3. Mark 3:7 says this: Jesus withdrew with his disciples to the sea, and a great crowd followed him from Galilee and Judea and Jerusalem and Idumea, and from beyond the Jordan and from Tyre and Sidon. When the great crowd heard all that he was doing, they came to him. In other words, his fame spread out all around Galilee. and it had spread all the way down to Jerusalem, beyond the Jordan, all the way down. And so he probably had heard of Jesus. Remember, all the Pharisees came up. A lot of scribes and Pharisees came up from Jerusalem to challenge Jesus. And so he's probably heard who this Jesus of Nazareth was. And he recognizes not just that he's Jesus of Nazareth. What does he say to Jesus? Son of David. Son of David. Now this is an important term. Now, this was a reference to the Messiah, to the king who is going to be a descendant of David, who is going to come and reign in glory and splendor forever and ever. The Messiah, the Christ, which means the anointed one, the one anointed by God to come. So when he's saying Son of David, that's a huge title that carried with it weight of the Messiah, weight of a descendant of David that was going to come to reign. And this is the only time that Jesus is addressed Son of David. A lot of onlys in this passage. The only person Jesus heals that he names, the only time that Jesus is called Son of David by someone. And he does it more than once, right? He calls out, Son of David. Hey, quiet down. Shh, be quiet. Don't bother him. He yells out even more, Son of David, have mercy on me. And Jesus doesn't say, hey, don't call me that. Don't call me Son of David. He allows him to call it, and in a sense, he affirms it, because now he doesn't even say, don't call me that, but he responds in a very positive way to him. He says, call him. Tell him to come. Son of David. I just want to give you a few verses on this phrase and this talking about the descendant of David. We could spend a lot of time delving into the Old Testament, but I just want to give you a few passages. One is Isaiah 11:1. Isaiah 11:1. We could turn there. Psalms, Proverbs. Ecclesiastes, Song of Solomon, and then you hit Isaiah. It's huge. 66 books, 66 chapters. Isaiah is a mini Bible. 66 books in the Bible, or 66 chapters in Isaiah, and actually the first 33, just like the Old Testament, 39, like the Old Testament, are kind of judgment and law, and then the last 27, as the New Testament, kind of talk about the Messiah, the Christ. But in Isaiah 11, verse 1 says this, there shall come forth a shoot from the stump of Jesse, and a branch from his roots shall bear fruit. Now Handel knew this passage well, if you've ever heard Handel's Messiah, but this is talking about Jesus. From the stump of Jesse. Now who is Jesse's son? Bo and Luke were his nephews, but Jesse's son was David, right? And then David had a descendant, and the descendants of David is this one who's going to be a branch, the shoot from the stump of Jesse. That's talking about Jesus. Jesus is this stump, is the shoot, the branch that was a growth from the stump of Jesse. In other words, there's going to be a stump. When you stump a tree, has anybody ever stumped a tree? I know some of you have. You're cutting a tree down, right? I've seen trees that are cut down, and this little shoot is just coming up out of the middle. It's the weirdest thing to see. A little shoot coming out of the middle. There's still life because these roots are still down in the ground, and they're still able to give new growth, new life to this. And that's kind of what happened to Israel. Israel was destroyed. 586, Nebuchadnezzar came in and wiped out Jerusalem, took everybody over to Babylon. But yet there remains a stump. And this stump is going to fulfill the promises that God made to David, that one of your descendants will reign on the throne forever. This will be the shoot from the stump of Jesse. That's Jesus, the descendant of David. Flip over to the right to Jeremiah. Jeremiah 23, verse 5. Jeremiah 23:5 says, "Behold, the days are coming, declares the Lord, when I will raise up for David a righteous branch, and he shall reign as king, deal wisely, and shall execute justice and righteousness in the land." Again, you have this David, a descendant of David, and the branch, this concept of the branch coming forth from the stump of Jesse that's going to reign as king forever. The son of David that will reign. And these are in pretty good order. The next one's in Ezekiel. So go past Lamentations to Ezekiel to the right. Ezekiel 34, verse 23. Ezekiel 34, verse 23. "And I will set up over them one shepherd, my servant David. He shall feed them and be their shepherd. And I, the Lord, will be their God, and my servant David shall be prince among them. I, the Lord, have spoken." This is after David has already lived. He's not talking about David. He's using that to represent the son of David who is going to come, a descendant of David who will come. Well, is Jesus that a descendant of David? Is Jesus this one, the son of David? Matthew 1:1. You probably read through this and just go right into the genealogy, or that maybe if you're like some of us, skip the genealogy and start reading after all the names. There's a bunch of names, and we're going to read below that. Here we go. Matthew 1:1, though, says this: "The book of the genealogy of Jesus Christ, the son of David, the son of Abraham." Now, these are big pegs. David, who is also a son of Abraham. So he's saying he's in the line of Abraham. He's in the line of David. But how? How is he in the line of David? I thought that Jesus was born of a miraculous birth, and he was. Matthew, go down a little lower, 1:20, says this: Joseph was a righteous man, right? And he, when he found out that Mary was with child, he was going to divorce her, separate her. Even though they were betrothed, he was going to divorce her and just kind of not push the issue. And an angel came to him, verse 20, and said this: "But he considered these things. Behold, an angel of the Lord appeared to him in a dream, saying, Joseph, son of David." Joseph, son of David. "Do not fear to take Mary as your wife, for that which is conceived in her is from the Holy Spirit. She will bear a son. You shall call his name Jesus, for he will save his people from their sins." According to the flesh, sometimes the Bible says this. He is a descendant of Joseph according to the flesh. In other words, he was his earthly father, although he didn't have a part in him being born, because God put Jesus in Mary is a miraculous thing. And the virgin conceived and bore a son, and we shall call his name Emmanuel. It says, God with us. But because his father was of the tribe of Judah, he was not only of the tribe of Judah, even more specifically, he was a descendant of, it says right there in the passage, of David. Jesus is the son of David that's talked about in the Old Testament to come to be the Messiah, the Christ, the anointed one, the King who will reign forever and ever. Bartimaeus recognized who Jesus was. Not just Jesus of Nazareth, but he calls him Son of David, attaching with it all the importance of that prophecy about the Messiah who was to come. You see, he got it. He knew who this man was. That's why she's screaming out all the more, "Jesus, have mercy on me, Son of David." He's saying, I know who you are. You are the Messiah. You're the Son of David. You're the one who's come. I've heard of what you did. I know you are the Son of David. Up to this point, when someone told Jesus that he was the Christ, what did he do? Hey, shh, don't tell anybody that. Keep it on the down low. I think that's, certain versions say that. Jesus saith unto them, keep it on the down low. I am not to be known as the Christ yet. It's not time yet. Peter, who do you say that I am? You are the Christ. Well, keep it hush hush. Keep it quiet, he says to Peter. In Matthew 8:30 it says he strictly charged them to tell no one about him. But what changed? Why now when Bartimaeus says this, he's like, all right, go ahead. You can go. Bring it on. Son of David, go ahead. Actually, come on up. I want to talk to you. What changed? He is about to reveal to the whole world that he is the Messiah. He is about to receive what the Father has before him, which is the cross. He is a week away from the cross. This is right before the next thing we read in Mark is the triumphal entry on Sunday. We call it Palm Sunday, which we'll celebrate next Sunday as the day that Jesus entered Jerusalem for the last time before being crucified. And in that week, he lets it out. And when people ask him, he says, it is as you say. Are you the Son of David? Yes. Are you the Christ? Yes. Are you the King? It's as you say. He now embraces the title, embraces who he is, because it's time. Jesus was obedient to the Father to go to the cross, even though he knew what it would cost, and he had the patience to tell people not to call him the Christ until now it was time for him to be recognized as the Messiah, as the Christ. What's changed? You know, when I was growing up in school, I talked a lot in class, believe it or not. In fact, I talked to my mom about this. There was one time all my teachers got together and they had a powwow because I was talking in all their classes, and I had so many detentions, and I won't tell you the whole story because it's a little embarrassing. Okay, I'll tell you. I forged my mom's signature in 8th grade on my detentions because I got so many of them, and I knew that I would really get in trouble at home if they knew how bad I was being at school. I thought I could just kind of brush that aside. They brought all the detentions together, the stack of detentions, and put it before my parents and said, what is going on that you are not disciplining your child after this many detentions in school? And my mom just looked over and was like, we didn't know about them. Like, we didn't know that he had them. So anyway, kids, don't do that. It's bad, okay? Pastor John, he wrote down his mom's signature. That was bad. It's very bad. Well, I would sometimes say something in class and get in trouble, and somebody else said the exact same thing a little earlier, and they didn't get in trouble, and I would tell the teacher, why do I get in trouble and they didn't get in trouble for saying the same thing? Have you ever thought this or heard of this from someone? Yeah? And one of my teachers said, timing is everything. Timing is everything. I would say it while they're in the middle of their teaching, right? And I'd interrupt them. Timing is everything. And what I mean by that is this. It is now time for Jesus to be known as the Messiah, as the Christ, as the Son of God, who has come to take care of the sins of man. All the things that were prophesied, all the things that were told to his parents when he was born are now on display for humanity. It's time. And Bartimaeus recognizes this, who Jesus is. So after this recognition, he makes a request. Jesus says to him, come. He comes and he says, what do you want me to do? What would you say to Jesus if he asked you that right now? What do you want me to do for you? I mean, Jesus is standing in front of you and he says, what do you want me to do? Well, Bartimaeus knew his biggest problem was that he couldn't see. His biggest issue was that he was blind. And he says, help me regain my sight. May I regain my sight. Now, if he knew to call Jesus the Son of David, he may have known other scriptures about the Messiah. Let me just give you two more. the Son of David, the Messiah, when he comes, Isaiah 35:4 says this. Say to those who have an anxious heart, be strong, fear not. Behold, your God will come with vengeance, with the recompense of God. He will come and save you. Then the eyes of the blind shall be opened, and the ears of the deaf unstopped. Did Bartimaeus know that passage? If I was a blind man and I heard that sometime, and I'm in church, listening in synagogue, and somebody reads that passage, the blind... Whoa, could you read that again? Could you read that part? No, that part about the eyes being open. The eyes of the blind shall be open. Whoa, I like that. I like that. I like that verse. He probably clung onto that verse. And then he hears that Jesus of Nazareth is coming. That's the Son of God. That's the Son of David. And I know that the Son of David is the one that will open up that blind eyes. Jesus, have mercy on me. Somebody's telling him to be quiet. He says, I will not be quiet. I've been waiting my whole life for this. For the Son of David to come, for my eyes to be opened? Isaiah 61:1 also says, the Spirit of the Lord is upon me, because the Lord has anointed me to bring the good news to the poor. He has sent me to bind up the brokenhearted, proclaim liberty to the captives, opening of prison to those who are bound. He came to set free the captives and to make the blind to see. Bartimaeus recognizes, so he asks, he requests in accordance with who he thinks Jesus is, the Son of David, this King who would come, God that would be with us to make the blind to see. You know, scientists have used lots of therapies for making someone who has bad sight to see. They have made some new inroads in this area. When I first preached about being blind, it was probably 2010, no one had ever been cured from blindness. Well, now with gene therapy and doing things and all kinds of crazy things, I mean, amazing things that they're doing, people can start to see like forms or like objects, but not pure sight. Not just good, healthy, fully well vision. It's something that we still can't figure out. Someone is born without eyesight, it's really tough. We have transplants and other things, but to transplant an eye, it just doesn't work that way. It's so intricate. There's so many pieces and parts in the eye. And Jesus brings restoration to this man's blindness. Something that we still can't even do in science today. He says to him in verse 52, go your way, your faith has made you well. And immediately he recovered his sight and followed him on the way. Immediately. There, we know that word from Mark. Immediately. But this time it means immediately. Like Jesus said it, bam. He has sight. He can see. And as a result of this, what does Bartimaeus do? He follows Jesus. I'm following that guy. I can see now. I'm following him. Your faith has made you well. We've heard that passage even in our study of Mark before. It is a familiar phrase that Jesus has used. What does he really mean here? Well, what does that word mean? Well, let me tell you. Whole. It means to be healed physically, to be whole. It's not just, are you well? Like, are you feeling good today? Yes, I'm well. You know, if you know your grammar, when someone says, how are you today? You're not supposed to say, I'm good. They're supposed to say, no one is good except God. You are not good. I'm well. Oh, you're well. Okay. It means to be healed physically, to be whole, to be one again. And faith, we know what faith is. Faith is a belief. It's a trust. And in this case, this particular faith, what he trusted and what Bartimaeus trusted in was the Lord's ability to help him in his physical and spiritual distress. Belief and trust in the Lord's ability to help us in our physical and spiritual distress. In Mark 5:34, when we read through this, it said, he said to her, "Daughter, your faith has made you well. Go in peace and be healed of your disease." And in Luke, the Gospel of Luke, same thing, same passage. Your faith has made you well, has saved you, she says, go in peace. And then Luke 17:19, he says, "Rise and go your way, your faith has made you well." Now, let me put some things together for you. I told you there are 3 acts in Mark. There are 3 movements or 3 sections of Mark. Where was the first section of Mark? Where would that happen? Not rhetorical. Where did that happen? What part of Galilee? Galilee. You have the baptism, then he goes up to Galilee, and all the way to chapter 8 is in Galilee. Then the second section, we're ending it today. The second section started in 8:22, and it ends here at the end of chapter 10. From 8:22 to chapter 10, he's moving. Jesus is going from Galilee down to Jerusalem. He's going to be in Jerusalem. That whole process right there is the movement. That's the second. If you look back in 8:22, something happened there. There was a miracle. What was it? In 8:22, Mark 8:22. What miracle started this whole thing? This move from Galilee down. And they came to Bethsaida, and people brought him a blind man and begged him to touch him. And then he heals the man's sight. So you have this section, starts with the healing of a blind man, and he goes all the way down. Now he's in Jericho, he's about to go to Jerusalem, and what does he do at the end? He heals a blind man. You have this inclusio of this healing the blind. In between is this move. And he does a few more miracles in Jerusalem. One of them is healing a man's ear that Peter cuts off. He heals that ear. He does a couple other things. But this is the last miracle before he enters into Jerusalem. Bartimaeus recognizes Jesus for who he is. We need to do the same. We need to recognize that Jesus is the Son of God. That he has power. He's fully God and fully man. And he is able to do anything in his holy will. Jesus is able to accomplish anything that conforms to his holy will. Then Bartimaeus requested help from Jesus. We need to identify our need. Now, for some of us, for some people, maybe not anyone here, maybe someone here, our greatest need is our forgiveness that Jesus establishes and provides by his death on the cross and his resurrection, where he is declared the Son of God with power. That's the first and foremost thing that we need, is to deal with our sin, the things that we've done wrong. That's why Jesus came, to save us, to seek and save the lost. We all are in that batch, in that boat of being lost. And Jesus came to die for our sins. And we need him. Then we need to identify the sins that we have day in and day out. And we need to identify our struggle with sins. And ask for forgiveness on a daily basis, if not hourly basis. And we need to ask God's help to conquer our sin, transform our mind through his word as we read his word. We need to ask for help. I think sometimes we forget that we have the God of the universe on our side, that we are children of the King, that the Holy Spirit resides within us, and that Jesus is God, and that he still has the power to act and to heal and to guide and do anything that he desires to do that's according to his will. And he can restore anything. He can restore that relationship that you think is beyond repair. He can restore a marriage that you think is impossible to move forward. He can heal. He can bring about restoration of emotions when we feel like we're beyond hope. All we have to do is pray to Jesus Christ in faith, and He will show up in power. We pray to Jesus Christ in faith, He will show up in power. When's the last time you cried out to Jesus? You admitted your inability to accomplish some task. You asked Jesus for help. You recognized that Jesus is God. You requested help, and He restored you. And then when He does that, we follow Him. We initially follow Him when we come to salvation in Christ. But then we follow Jesus on the way, on the path that He has before us, because He's God. Now, in the Undercover Boss, that episode I talked about, the CEO made some real changes. While he was doing an install, they called the tech line, and they had to wait for 20 minutes. So the CEO is waiting for 20 minutes. The person puts on hold for 20 minutes. He didn't like that. He said, we need to change that. That when our techs call in, they're not standing there, and it's embarrassing. He said to be standing there in front of a customer for 20 minutes on hold, waiting to get an answer about something. So we got to change that. They're like, yes, sir, we'll change that. Then he changed a supply line in the warehouse because they went to get some components. They didn't have them, so they just had to sit there for 2 days and wait, not install any DirecTVs because they didn't have a part. And then finally the parts came in, and then they did. He said, we got to work on our supply line. And one of the drivers didn't have a GPS in his truck. He had to have his own GPS, and this was back in, I think, 2011, before all your phones had a GPS on it. He went out and bought his own GPS so that he could drive the truck and not get lost around, so he made sure all the trucks had GPS. But he also had the power to do some really cool things. One of the guys that he rides with for the delivery is a Christian. And he talks about being saved out of a lifestyle of on the street in a gang, and then how he now has a ministry in his church to reach kids and be a mentor and all this. And the CEO on his own writes a check for $5,000 to this guy's ministry and gives him $5,000 for that. Another girl was working full time and going to school. And he started a scholarship from DirecTV for employees to go to school, and he gives this lady $10,000 scholarship to go to school. They didn't recognize that the CEO had come down from his position to dwell among them, and that he had the power to do whatever he wanted in his company. You see the comparison. Jesus came down from his position, didn't stop being the Son of God, but his position took a position of humility as a man, lived among us, came to his people. His people did not recognize him. They did not receive him. They crucified him. But on the third day, he rose again in power. Jesus has the power to save you now. Jesus has the power to forgive you, to heal you, to guide you. Pray to Jesus Christ in faith. He will show up in power.